March 1918, Chaumont, France. 40 kilometers behind the front line, in the stone cellar of a requisition lycée, a woman sits before a wooden panel studded with brass jacks and silk-covered cords. Her name is Grace Banker. She is 25 years old. She wears the olive-drab uniform of the United States Army Signal Corps, though the Army does not consider her a soldier. Before her, the switchboard glows under the weak filament bulbs, a matrix of metal eyelets, each one representing a voice, an order, a regiment, a life. She does not hesitate. Her hand moves, cord in, jack down, plug seated with a tactile click that her fingers have learned to distinguish from the 50 other varieties of click on this board. A general's voice crackles through. She patches him to the artillery command at Toul. Connection time, 0.4 seconds. The general does not say thank you. He does not know her name. He will never meet her. But because of her, the guns will fire on the correct coordinates. Because of her, a battalion will not advance into its own barrage. This is not a story about heroism in the traditional sense. This is a story about infrastructure, about the invisible architecture that made modern warfare possible, and about the women who became, for a brief and unacknowledged moment in history, the most critical human algorithm the United States Army had ever deployed. Let us rewind. November 1917. The United States has been at war for 7 months. The American Expeditionary Forces, 2 million men eventually, are arriving in France. They bring with them the industrial confidence of a nation that has never fought a European war. They bring railways, trucks, steel helmets, and an unshakable belief in the superiority of American engineering. They do not bring a functional communication system. The problem is not equipment. The Signal Corps has field telephones, the EE-5, a sturdy mahogany box with a magneto crank and a Bakelite receiver. They have cable, miles of rubber-insulated copper wire strung along trench parapets and buried in the chalky mud of the Meuse-Argonne. They have switchboards, the Western Electric 10-line manual exchange, the same model used in small-town post offices across Iowa and Pennsylvania. But they do not have operators who can use them. The French system, the system the Americans must integrate with, is a labyrinth. It is not one network, but dozens, stitched together over 3 years of trench warfare. The French do not use the American ring signal, 2 long, 1 short. They use a continuous buzz. The French do not say, "Number, please." They say, "J'écoute," I am listening. The French do not label their lines with rational alphanumerics. They use the names of long-dead villages, Vaux, Fleury, Douaumont, places that no longer exist except as coordinates on a map and as smoking craters filled with barbed wire and bones. The American soldiers assigned to the switchboards, farm boys from Kansas, clerks from Boston, cannot navigate this. They do not speak French. They do not understand the idioms of military communication, the difference between urgent priorité and urgent absolu. They plug the wrong cords into the wrong jacks. They drop calls. They confuse artillery commands. In the crucible of industrialized warfare, where a single misrouted message can mean the annihilation of a company, this is catastrophic. General John J. Pershing, commander of the AEF, does not mince words in his November 1917 communiqué to the War Department. The present system is wholly inadequate. Delays average 4 to 6 minutes per connection. This is unacceptable. The French express astonishment at our incompetence. Immediate action required. 4 to 6 minutes.
In a war where the window for counter-battery fire is measured in seconds, where the timing of a creeping barrage must be synchronized to the minute, this is not merely inadequate, it is suicidal. The solution, when it arrives, is radical. Not in its technology. The technology remains the same: the manual switchboard, the magneto crank, the silk cords and brass jacks. The radical element is human. The Signal Corps will recruit women, not as auxiliaries, not as nurses or clerks, as operators, bilingual, trained, and deployed to the front. They will be sworn in. They will wear the uniform. They will live under military discipline and serve under fire. They will be called the hellogirls, and they will transform the communications infrastructure of the Western Front into the fastest, most efficient system the United States Army has ever fielded.
January 1918, New York City. The AT&T building on Broadway. In a 10th-floor conference room, a panel of Signal Corps officers and civilian telephone supervisors conducts interviews. The requirements are precise and unforgiving. Fluency in French, not high school French, not conversational French, but technical, military, idiomatic French. The ability to understand a colonel from Marseille and a liaison officer from Bretagne, each with their own regional cadence, their own elisions and consonantal shifts. Experience as a telephone operator, not months, but years. The muscle memory of the switchboard must be instinctive. The hand must move before the brain has finished processing the request. In the field, under bombardment, there will be no time for hesitation. Physical stamina. The operators will work 12-hour shifts. They will stand, not sit, before boards that stretch 8 feet wide. They will repeat the same motions: cord up, jack in, ring signal, connect, hundreds of times per hour. Their hands will blister. Their shoulders will ache. There will be no rotation, no relief. The war does not pause for fatigue. And something else. Something the recruiting literature does not name, but which every interviewer understands: emotional discipline. The ability to remain calm when the voice on the other end is shouting, when the line is crackling with interference, when the distant rumble of artillery has become a roar, when you know, because you have been trained to know, that the man you are connecting may be ordering his own death. The applicants are not naive. Many are the daughters of immigrants, French Canadians from Maine, Creole speakers from Louisiana, women whose mothers fled the Franco-Prussian War and who grew up translating for their parents at the grocer, at the bank, at the immigration office. They understand, intuitively, what it means to be the intermediary, to be the translator between two worlds that do not and cannot speak to each other. 7,000 women apply. The Signal Corps selects 223. Among them, Grace Banker, a Barnard College graduate and chief operator for the New Jersey Telephone Company. Berthe Hunt, born in France, raised in Pennsylvania, fluent in the argot of both the Paris exchanges and the Philadelphia main line. Suzanne Prévost, whose father was a French diplomat, who learned to operate a switchboard at 16 because she was bored with embroidery and wanted something useful to do with her hands. They are not selected because they are women. They are selected despite it. The Signal Corps has no interest in symbolism. It has interest in results. And the results, in trials conducted at AT&T headquarters, are unambiguous. Bilingual women connect calls in an average of 0.5 seconds. Monolingual men average 4.2 seconds. The women make 1/10 the errors. They handle 3 times the call volume per shift. This is not sentiment. This is mathematics. They are trained at AT&T facilities in New York and at Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. The training is not gentle. They learn the phonetic alphabet, Abel, Baker, Charlie, though they will rarely use it. The French prefer to spell out village names letter by letter, syllable by syllable, in a sing-song cadence that sounds almost liturgical. They learn the classifications of military calls: command, red light; artillery coordination, blue light; medical evacuation, yellow light; routine administrative, no light; lowest priority, often ignored. They learn to strip and reassemble the EE-5 field telephone. They learn to test lines for continuity using a portable galvanometer, a small brass box with a needle that twitches when current flows. They learn to identify faults: a break in the wire, no signal; a short to ground, weak signal; crosstalk from a parallel line; overlapping voices, phantom connections. And they learn the most critical skill of all: triage. In the chaos of battle, every voice believes itself urgent. The infantry lieutenant who needs rations, the supply sergeant who needs transport, the chaplain who needs confirmation of a burial detail. All of these are important. None of them are urgent. But the forward observer calling in enemy coordinates, that is urgent. The regimental commander requesting a barrage lift so his men can advance, that is urgent. The medic calling for an ambulance to a casualty collection point where men are bleeding out in the mud, that is urgent. The operator must decide. She must decide in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She must decide without seeing the battlefield, without knowing the context, armed only with the timbre of a voice, the rhythm of breath, the particular quality of desperation that distinguishes a man who wants something from a man who needs something to survive.
This is not a clerical task. This is judgment. And the women, the Signal Corps discovers, are better at it than the men. Why? The official reports do not speculate, but the operators themselves, in letters and diaries, offer their theories. Women, they write, are trained from birth to read subtext, to listen not just to words, but to inflection, to silence, to the micro pauses that signal uncertainty or fear. A man says, "I need that connection now." A woman hears, "He does not actually need it now. He is impatient, but he is safe." Another man says, "I need that connection." Same words, different rhythm. The woman hears, "He is calm, but the calmness is artificial. He is using calmness to control panic. He needs the connection now." She routes him first. By March 1918, the first unit, 33 women under the command of Chief Operator Grace Banker, arrives in France. They are issued uniforms, though the Army has not designed uniforms for women. They wear modified men's tunics cinched at the waist with leather belts. They wear campaign hats, the wide-brimmed Montana Peak style, which they learn to pin at a rakish angle to keep the brim from obscuring their vision at the switchboard. They wear high leather boots, polished to a mirror shine, because that is what soldiers do. And they are, despite the Army's reluctance to admit it, soldiers. They are billeted in Chaumont, at the general headquarters of the AEF. The building is a converted school, cold stone and narrow windows. Their quarters are on the 3rd floor, a long dormitory lined with iron cots. The room smells of damp wool and carbolic soap. At night, they can hear the artillery, a low, continuous rumble like summer thunder that never breaks into rain. They do not speak of being afraid. In their letters home, they write of the food, terrible, the weather, cold, then wet, then cold again, the French civilians, kind, curious, sometimes pitying. They do not write of the fear, because the fear is constant, ambient, unremarkable. It is the static beneath every call. They go to work. To understand what the hellogirls did, you must first understand the machine they operated. The manual switchboard of 1918 is not a computer. It is not even, in the modern sense, a machine. It is an interface, a physical intermediary between two realities, the human need to communicate and the electromagnetic physics that makes communication possible over distance. Picture it. A panel, 8 feet wide and 5 feet tall, mounted vertically on a wooden frame. The surface is bakelite, smooth and cool to the touch, drilled with hundreds of circular holes. These are the jacks, the termination points for telephone lines. Each jack corresponds to a specific location: a regimental command post, an artillery battery, a field hospital, a supply depot. Above each jack, a row of tiny shutters, metal flaps, spring-loaded, that drop when a call comes in. When a telephone on the network is activated, when someone turns the magneto crank, sending a pulse of electrical current down the line, the shutter drops with a soft clack. This is the signal. Someone is calling. In front of the operator, suspended on a hinged bracket, hang the cords. 2 per pair, coiled like brass serpents. Each cord terminates in a plug, a metal cylinder, half an inch in diameter, wrapped in silk thread for grip. The plug has a tip and a ring, separated by an insulating washer. When inserted into a jack, the tip connects to one side of the circuit, the ring to the other. This completes the connection. But the connection is not automatic. The operator must do 3 things, in sequence, without error. First, she must answer the incoming call. She takes a cord from her station, her personal pair wired to her headset, and plugs it into the jack where the shutter has dropped. She flips a small toggle switch. This opens the voice circuit. She says, "Number, please." Or, if the call is from a French line, "Allô, j'écoute." The voice on the other end tells her the destination: Toul, Artillery Section 4, or Château Thierry, Poste de Commandement. Second, she must find the destination jack. Her eyes scan the board. 800 jacks. The labels are abbreviated, inconsistent, sometimes illegible. She must know, from memory, that Toul Arty 4 is in the 3rd row, 7th column from the left. She takes the second cord of the pair, the outgoing cord, and plugs it into that jack. Third, she must signal the destination. She presses a small button on the cord handle. This sends a ringing current, a pulsed 20-volt AC signal down the line. At the destination, a telephone bell rings. Someone picks up. The circuit is live. She flips another toggle. This connects the 2 cords, creating a continuous electrical path from the caller to the called. The voices can now hear each other. She does not participate in the conversation. She cannot. Her role is to create the connection, then to monitor it, to watch for the moment when one side or the other hangs up, breaking the circuit, at which point the shutter will rise again and she will unplug the cords and hang them back on the bracket. This is one call. She will handle 250 calls per hour for 12 hours without break. The physical mechanics are brutal. The cords are heavy, solid brass fittings, thick rubber insulation. After an hour, the operator's wrists begin to ache. After 4 hours, her fingers cramp. After 8 hours, she can no longer feel the difference between a properly seated plug and one that is making intermittent contact. She learns to seat the plug by sound, not by touch. A good connection makes a specific click, a clean, definitive snap. A bad connection makes a softer sound, almost a scrape. She learns to hear the difference through the ambient noise of the switchboard room, the overlapping voices, the hum of the generators, the constant low-frequency buzz of the trunk lines. And then there is the interference. The Western Front is an electromagnetic nightmare, thousands of miles of wire strung haphazardly across a landscape churned by artillery. The wires run parallel to each other, sometimes for miles. This creates crosstalk, phantom voices bleeding from one circuit into another. An operator hears 2 conversations at once, overlapping, impossible to separate. She must learn to filter one voice from the other, to hold in her mind 2 simultaneous threads of dialogue, and to route each correctly without mixing them. Then there is the weather. Rain degrades insulation, the lines short to ground, creating a maddening hum that drowns out speech. Lightning induces surges that blow out the delicate coils in the switchboard relays. Fog conducts sound strangely. Voices seem to come from the wrong direction, or from no direction at all. And then there's the shelling.
When an artillery barrage hits near a telephone line, the concussion wave travels through the earth. The wire, buried shallow, vibrates. The vibration induces a current, a low-frequency pulse that sounds through the headset like a drumbeat. The operators learn to distinguish the signature of different shells. The 75mm French gun, a sharp crack, high frequency. The 105mm German howitzer, a deeper thud, felt as much as heard. The 155mm long-range bombardment gun, a slow, rolling bass that makes the floor tremble. They learn to predict, within seconds, where a shell will land, based on the sound traveling through the wire. And they learn that if the sound stops, if the drumbeat cuts off mid-pulse, it means the wire has been severed, which means the connection is dead, which means the regiment on the other end has just lost contact with command, which means they are now isolated, blind, unable to call for support or to report their position, which means they have, in the taxonomy of industrial warfare, ceased to exist. The operators do not leave their stations when the shelling starts. This is not bravery, this is protocol. The switchboard is the nexus. If they leave, the entire network collapses. So they stay. They wear steel helmets, the British-style Brodie helmet, which they have been issued because the American Doughboy helmet does not fit over a telephone headset. They crouch sometimes when the concussions are close enough to rattle the jacks on the board, but they do not unplug the cords. They do not stop connecting calls. In her diary, Grace Banker writes, "The shelling tonight was very heavy. We could see the flashes through the window. Louise's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the plugs. I told her to breathe. She asked me if I was frightened. I told her I didn't have time to be frightened. This was true." July 1918. The Second Battle of the Marne. The German spring offensive has stalled, but the front remains fluid, chaotic. The Americans are holding a sector east of Chateau Thierry. The telephone exchange is not in Chaumont now. It is in a dugout, 3 kilometers behind the line. The dugout is a hole in the earth, reinforced with timber and sandbags, lit by kerosene lanterns because the generators cannot be transported this far forward. The switchboard is a portable model, a smaller version of the Chaumont board, with only 50 jacks. But those 50 jacks represent the entire communications infrastructure of an infantry division. 3 regiments, 12 battalions, 48 companies, approximately 15,000 men spread across 10 kilometers of trench line. And 6 women. They work in pairs, in 6-hour shifts, because 12 hours is no longer sustainable. The air in the dugout is thick with damp and smoke. The walls weep condensation. At night, rats scuttle across the plank floor. The women have learned to ignore them. They have learned to ignore most things: the cold, the smell of latrine trenches, the constant background noise of men dying within earshot. What they cannot ignore is the board. A call comes in. Louise Le Breton, 22 years old, from Quebec, fluent in the French-Canadian dialect that the Parisian operators sometimes struggle to understand, plugs in. "Number, please." The voice is American, young, shaking with adrenaline or fear, or both. "I need artillery. We're taking fire from the tree line. Coordinates." She does not let him finish. Hold. She knows the protocol. Forward observer calls go directly to the artillery liaison, no intermediate routing. She plugs the second cord into the jack marked Arty Coord 77th Div. She rings.
No answer. She rings again. Still nothing. She unplugs. She tries the backup line, routed through a different exchange. This time, a voice. French, irritated. Quoi? I have an American forward observer requesting fire support. Coordinates incoming. Donnez-lui.
She patches the call through. The American voice rattles off the coordinates. The French voice repeats them back. The call disconnects. Elapsed time, 11 seconds. 11 seconds is an eternity, but it is also, under the circumstances, miraculous. In the chaos of the Marne offensive, with trunk lines being cut hourly, with exchanges being shelled and operators being evacuated, and the entire communications network held together by improvisation and luck, 11 seconds is the difference between a company being overrun and a company being saved by a barrage that lands exactly where it is needed. Louise does not know if the barrage arrives. She will never know. The forward observer does not call back to say thank you. He is probably dead, or he is moving, or he has simply forgotten her in the next crisis. This is the nature of the work. You connect the call. You do not see the result. But sometimes you do. August 1918. Ligny-en-Barrois. The exchange takes a direct hit from a 105mm shell. The building, a stone farmhouse requisitioned from a family that fled in 1914, collapses. 2 walls implode. The roof comes down in a cascade of tile and timber. The switchboard, miraculously, remains intact, but the power is out. The generators are buried under rubble. Grace Banker and 3 other operators dig the board out by hand. They do not wait for engineers. They do not wait for orders. They drag the board into the cellar of the adjacent building. They splice the incoming trunk lines to the jacks using pocket knives and friction tape. They rig a hand-cranked magneto generator to provide power. Within 45 minutes, the exchange is operational. In her official report, Banker writes, "Service was interrupted for approximately 30 minutes due to structural damage. No calls were lost. Operations resumed at 15:30 hours." 30 minutes. In those 30 minutes, an entire division was deaf and mute. But because the operators did not abandon their posts, because they rebuilt the network with their hands and their wits, and their refusal to accept that the system could fail, the division did not collapse. This happens again and again. At Soissons, an operator named Bertha Hunt works through a gas attack, her field mask fogging so badly she can barely see the jacks. She routes calls by memory, her hands moving in patterns she has repeated so many thousands of times that she no longer needs her eyes. At the Meuse-Argonne, the largest American offensive of the war, the hellogirls handle an average of 26 million calls over 47 days. 26 million! The number is almost incomprehensible. It represents every command, every request, every casualty report, every logistical coordination that kept the offensive moving. Without them, the offensive does not happen. The artillery does not fire. The infantry does not advance. The wounded do not get evacuated. The women do not think of themselves as heroes. They think of themselves as operators. They are doing their jobs. The job happens to be essential to the survival of an army, but that is not, in their minds, the same as heroism. Heroism is voluntary. This is simply the work they were trained to do. But the men, the officers, the infantrymen, the engineers who maintain the lines, they see it differently. In letters and memoirs written decades later, they remember the voices, the calm, unshakable voices of the women who answered when they called.
the voices that never wavered, never panicked, never said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you." One lieutenant, writing in 1920, describes calling the exchange during the Argonne offensive. He had been pinned down for 6 hours. His men were out of ammunition. He needed resupply, but the supply depot was in a different sector, connected through a French exchange he could not reach on his own. He called the operator. He does not remember her name. He describes her voice as steady, like she was taking a dinner reservation. He gave her the problem. She said, "Hold." 30 seconds later, she came back on the line. "I have the supply depot, connecting you now." He got his ammunition. His men survived. He writes, "I never met her. I don't know if she lived through the war, but I think of her often. I think of all of them, the invisible women who held the wires together while the world came apart."
November 11th, 1918. The armistice. The guns fall silent. In Chaumont, in Ligny and Barrois, in the dugouts and the cellars and the requisitioned farmhouses where the hellogirls have lived for the past year, the switchboards go quiet. The shutters stop dropping. The calls stop coming. The women do not celebrate. They are too tired. They unplug the cords one last time. They coil them neatly on the brackets. They turn off the generators. They remove their headsets and hang them on the hooks. They go home. But they do not go home as soldiers. The army, which swore them in with an oath identical to the one administered to male enlistees, which issued them uniforms and service numbers and placed them under military discipline, now informs them that they were never, legally, members of the military. They were civilian contractors. The designation is absurd, and the women know it. They enlisted. They signed contracts with the War Department. They were subject to court-martial for disobedience. They served overseas, in a combat zone, under enemy fire. They were wounded. 2 operators were gassed. 1 was injured in a shelling that collapsed a building, and they received no medical benefits. They were paid less than male soldiers of equivalent rank, and now, they are told, they are not veterans. The reason, when it is finally articulated, is bureaucratic. The Army Act of 1916, which governs military enlistment, specifies that members of the armed forces must be male. The Signal Corps, in its urgency to solve the communications crisis, simply ignored this. It swore the women in anyway, assuming, correctly, that no one would challenge the decision during wartime. But now the war is over, and the Army's legal department has reviewed the matter, and the legal department has concluded that the enlistments were invalid. The women were never soldiers. Therefore, they are not entitled to veterans' benefits. No pensions, no medical care, no honorable discharge papers. No recognition. Grace Banker, now living in New York, working again for the telephone company, writes to the War Department. She is polite but firm. She encloses her service number, her orders, a photograph of herself in uniform. She asks for clarification. The War Department responds, "Your service is appreciated, but you are not eligible for veteran status." She writes again and again. For 10 years, she writes letters. She is not alone. Berthe Hunt writes. Louise Le Breton writes. Suzanne Prévost writes. They organize. They form the hellogirls Association. They hire lawyers. They testify before Congress. Congress is sympathetic, but Congress is not empowered to change the Army Act. That requires new legislation. The legislation does not come. A bill is introduced to grant veteran status to the hellogirls. It fails. Another bill. It fails. Another. Failure. The years pass. The women age. Some marry. Some have children. They do not speak often of the war. It is not that they are ashamed. It is that no one asks. The war, for most Americans, is something that happened to men. Women were nurses, perhaps, or factory workers. The idea that women served as soldiers, that women operated the communications network that made the Western Front function, is simply not part of the national narrative. And so the women fade from history. They are not mentioned in the official histories of the Signal Corps. They are not included in veterans' memorials. When they die, and they do die, one by one, through the 1930s and 1940s and 1950s, they are not buried with military honors. But they do not stop fighting.
In 1960, a younger generation takes up the cause. The daughters of the hellogirls, the nieces. They find their mother's uniforms in attic trunks, still smelling faintly of damp and smoke and the particular metallic tang of old brass. They find the letters, the photographs, the discharge papers that the Army refuses to call discharge papers. They write new letters. They contact historians. They testify before new congressional committees. And finally, in 1977, 59 years after the armistice, Congress passes Public Law 95-202. It is a short law, one paragraph. It states, "The Army Signal Corps female telephone operators who served overseas during World War I are hereby recognized as having served in the military forces of the United States." Veteran status. At last. By 1977, most of the hellogirls are dead. Of the 223 women who served, only 18 are still alive. They are in their 80s now, living in nursing homes and retirement communities. The government sends them honorable discharge certificates, printed on heavy paper, embossed with the seal of the Department of Defense. Grace Banker receives hers in the mail. She is 84 years old. She has been fighting for this piece of paper for 60 years. She frames it. She hangs it on the wall of her room. She does not cry. She simply looks at it for a long time. A reporter, interviewing her shortly before her death in 1980, asks, "Was it worth it? The fight, I mean? 6 decades for a piece of paper?" Banker's answer is immediate. It was never about the paper. It was about the truth. We served. We wore the uniform. We took the oath. That is the truth. I wanted the country to acknowledge the truth.